Now, according to recent reports, South Africa ranks among the top 10 countries in the world in terms of cybercrime. Now, South Africa ranked 7th out of 16 countries that were polled for the highest cost of cyber breaches. And this and many other alarming cyber fraud statistics will be discussed at the Fraud Summit, which will be held this week. Recently, a father and son duo were arrested in Durban in KwaZulu-Natal for operating a 99 Rand debit order scam. And for more on all of this, we're joined by Manie van Schalkwyk, CEO of the Southern African Fraud Prevention Service. Manie, good to have you with us here on Morning Live. Welcome.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to your show.
So just how big is the problem and the impact of data breaches or fraud in South Africa?
Yeah. It is quite significant, and we saw 2 data breaches in the last month or so. First being the TransUnion data breach, and then the Dis-Chem data breach. And what happens is that people's data is compromised, and that data is used then to open accounts in their name or take over accounts, and that is the biggest risk we have.
So, Manie, just to place where we are as South Africa, which country in the world is reported to be the absolute worst, just for interest's sake?
Yeah, well, it actually differs. You know, every month you'll find another one. So I think that the most important part is that we are in a position which we don't want to be. And we as consumers are putting our data in the hands of people for it to be protected. But we as consumers should also then take another step to add the level of protection on our name, just to make sure that our data is not abused in the sense that we suffer from it.
But how do we go about it, doing that, Manie? Because everywhere you go, especially now, post-COVID, everywhere you go, you are expected to leave your data. And refusing to do so could often result in refusal of entry to certain places. So how are we expected to do this?
Yeah, I think you're quite right. We cannot say we're withholding our data because we will not be able to be commercially active in any way or form. And data is a commodity. And we just need to be very vigilant. I think a couple of things. We need to be vigilant about our data, treat it like cash, I always say. Make sure you give it to people who deserve it. SAFPS, the company I work for, is a non-profit organization, and we provide a free service to consumers. If you take your iPhone or your smartphone, go to our website on safps.org.za, and you add a layer of protection on your identity, free of charge, which will assist if a fraudster is trying to open an account in your name. That credit provider will ask, where's your SAFPS number? And the fraudster won't have it. Also, I think we are moving into an era of biometrics, where that is your, biometrics only belongs to you. And people need to embrace biometrics. I think we're moving into a world of artificial intelligence, which can work against us. But we also, there's fantastic tools about behavioral metrics. And we are all trying to look at these tools during this conference and the next week, looking at how to prevent fraud by using these tools to availability.
If we look at, for example, one of the cases that I mentioned in the introduction, Manie, and this has been a problem for so many of us, where you have these 89 Rand, 99 Rand debit orders going off on your account. Now, how does this work? Because firstly, I would imagine that I would have to consent to any sort of deduction from my account. But the banks literally throw their hands up in the air, even though you say to them, I've never consented to this, and it becomes your problem.
Yeah, and it becomes a frustrating thing because I had a similar case where I was then sent back to this fraudulent company to resolve this issue, which is just ludicrous because, they shouldn't have taken this debit order in the first place. But the banks have employed new technology Like you said, for new debit orders, you will have to consent to it, and that will really break that entire scam which we're seeing now. So the banks have done something through the Payments Association, and I think it's been rolled out already.
And excuse me, Manie. I think the frustrating thing is whenever there are breaches that take place, you are left holding the baby literally, because even when someone steals your identity, it's almost as if the burden is upon you to prove that your identity was stolen, and you are sent from pillar to post, and it wasn't that difficult for the person to do the transaction to begin with, but it becomes almost impossible, a mammoth task for you to prove that this has happened.
Yeah, no, you're 100% correct, and we see, there are usually two victims of identity theft, and that's the person, the individual, and the organization that provided the credit, which will never get paid. So there are definitely two victims, and we as consumers, that's why I say we do trust organizations to manage our data on the one hand, but we as consumers also need to take a responsibility on and seeing the importance of protecting our data. And as I mentioned, this protective registration that you can do. And if we don't do it, you can just ask any person who's the victim of identity theft. It's a nightmare, because the moment you think it's been resolved, the fraudsters have opened another account, and you need to start that process from scratch. So it is a difficult position to be in. But we as consumers need to take the responsibility for our own data as well. It's a dual responsibility.
So, Manie, I go somewhere and I ask them, what are you going to do with my data? How are you going to store this data? The people who are collecting it at that point have no clue. So where does that leave me?
Yeah. And that's why we've got regulations and legislation around it. There is fantastic, the POPIA Act, the Protection of Personal Information Act, which actually regulates that whole circumstances on what people can and cannot do with data. And that was very necessary for us to have that legislation. The regulator, information regulator, is now fully established. They have got their teeth. So, and it will be interesting to see what happens with these two last data breaches, how the regulator actually acts on it.
Because it's one thing to have the necessary regulations and policies in place, Manie, but enforcing them is quite another. So if I walk out of here and I walk to a shop or a building around the corner, and they say to me, you have to produce your identity document for us to allow you access into this place. I can scream and shout as much as I like. They're not going to listen to me. They'll tell me, you don't want to, you can leave. How much of my information am I expected to provide by law?
Yeah, well, it is what you expected to provide and what let me put it the other way around. What the person who collects the data can only collect data for a specific purpose. And if they cannot, if they want you for a credit card, for instance, there's no data about your family history. That will be irrelevant to that. So people need to determine what information is necessary and only collect information for that purpose. If information is used for another purpose, then you as the consumer needs to consent to that. But I see and I hear your frustration because it's all academic talk. I think your question is to say, if the rubber hits the tar and this all goes wrong, where do we go? And how difficult it is to sort out. And my full sympathies lies with it. It's not an easy process.
So you spoke about, prevention of the cybercrime and what victims can possibly do. So some of the issues, you touched on the use of biometric technology, but beyond that, what are some of the other safeguards that you will possibly be discussing this week?
Yeah, well, I think firstly, we start with this fraud summit with a legendary Clem Sumter, which provides us, he's a well-known scenario guru and strategist, and he provides us with a lot of scenarios in South Africa on a global basis scenario, including the Russian war and on the Ukraine, and what impact it will have on South Africa. And then we take it further to a fraudulent part. We are speaking to experts in the UK and Australia that will share with us their fraud prevention methodologies and see what scams they have and how they fight those scams. Further in the conference, we would look at the local trends in the banking arena, in the telecoms arena, the insurance, as well as retail. Then, as we mentioned, we will look at tools. How can we use artificial intelligence to stop these criminals? How can we use behavioral metrics? How can we use the biometrics? And we've got a company, Secure Citizen, that will provide us with their insights. And then lastly, which I think is very interesting, as a Professor Danny Myberg he negotiates with cyber criminals. And he will, just give us his insights on how their minds work. Because if we understand that, maybe we can prevent it. Then the last two speakers will be June Bellamy. She was the Samsung whistleblower, and with significant effects on her life. And she will provide us with pitfalls and precautions in terms of whistleblowing. And our last speaker is a lady called Alison Botha, which had a normal life, got abducted, got stabbed, disemboweled, and nearly decapitated. And how she put her life together, and this challenge. So we've got a variety of interesting speakers at the summit, and we will hope we come out wiser.
Well, we hope so too, and it sounds absolutely fabulous, that lineup that you have there, Manie. And hopefully we can catch up again at a later stage, looking at some of the outcomes and what we can learn from others in the rest of the world as well. But thank you so much, Manie van Schalkwyk, CEO of the Southern African Fraud Prevention Service.